Hello, we are back. We are doing our book club this morning. Be Holy, for I Am Holy book club. Henrietta and Jeanette. And we are doing the book, The Complete Visions of Anne Catherine Emmerich. She has been approved in 2004 by St. Pope Paul II, St. Pope John Paul II. And so her visions have been okayed by the church, and they are amazing. So today we're going to learn about death of Saint Joseph, his death, and Jesus and Mary in Capharnum.
Yeah.
So here we go. As the time drew near for Jesus to begin his mission of teaching, I saw him ever more solitary and meditative. And toward the same time, the 13th year of Jesus, Joseph began to decline. I saw Jesus and Mary often with him. Mary sometimes sat on the ground by his couch, or upon a low, round, three-legged stool, which served also for a table. I seldom saw him eating, but when they did, or brought some refreshment to Joseph's bedside, it consisted of 3 white, rather long, 4-cornered pieces, about 2 fingers in breadth, that lay side by side on a little plate. And I saw also some little fruits in a dish. They gave him something to drink out of a mug. When Joseph was dying, Mary sat at the head of his bed, holding him in her arms. Jesus stood just below her, near Joseph's breast. The whole room was brilliant with light and full of angels. After his death, his hands were crossed on his breast. He was wrapped from head to foot in a white winding sheet, laid in a narrow casket, and placed in a very beautiful tomb, the gift of a good man. Only a few men followed the coffin with Jesus and Mary, but I saw it accompanied by angels and environed with light. Joseph's remains were afterwards removed by the Christians to Bethlehem and entered. I think I can see him lying there incorrupt. Joseph had of necessity to die before the Lord, for he could not have endured his crucifixion. He was too gentle, too loving. He had already suffered much from the persecution Jesus had to support from the malice of the Jews from his 20th to his 30th year, for they could not bear the sight of him. Their jealousy often made them exclaim, "From the carpenter's son," though he knew everything better than others, that he was frequently at variance with the teachings of the Pharisees, and that he always had around him a crowd of young followers. Hence,
Mary never ceased to suffer from these persecutions. Such pains always seemed to me sharper than those of martyrdom. Unspeakable was the love with which Jesus in his youth bore the jealous persecution of the Jews. After Joseph's death, Jesus and Mary removed to a little village of only a few houses between Capharnum and Bethsaida. A man named Levi, who was very much attached to the Holy Family, had given Jesus a house there in which to dwell. It stood alone, surrounded by a ditch of standing water. A couple of Levi's people were also were in the house in the capacity of servants, and Levi himself supplied all necessaries from Capharnum. It was to this little place that Peter's father retired when he gave over to him the fishery of Bethsaida. Jesus had already many followers among the young people of Nazareth, but they were not faithful to him. He walked with them in the country around the lake and went up to Jerusalem with them for the feasts. The Lazarus family in Bethania were already acquainted with the Holy Family. The Pharisees of Nazareth were against Jesus. They called him a vagrant. Levi gave him that house that he might, without fear of disturbance, live in it and gather his followers around him. There was on the lake around Capharnum a region of extraordinarily fertile and charming valleys. There were several harvests during the year and uncommonly beautiful leaves, blossoms, and fruits, all at the same time. Many distinguished Jews had gardens and castles there, Herod among the number. The Jews of Jesus's time were no longer like their fathers. Through commerce and their intercourse with heathens, they had become very corrupt. One never saw the women in public nor at work in the fields, excepting the very poorest gleaning some ears of corn. They were to be seen only on pilgrimages to Jerusalem and other holy places. Husbandry and all kinds of traffic were carried on mostly through slaves. I have seen all the cities of Galilee, where now scarcely 3 villages are in existence. There were then almost 100, an innumerable crowd of people. Mary Clopas, who was with her third husband, the father of Simeon of Jerusalem, dwelt in Anne's house near Nazareth, afterward removed with her boy Simeon to Mary's in Nazareth. The rest of her family and her servants remained at Anne's. When Jesus, a short time after, went from Capharnum by way of Nazareth to the region of Hebron, he was accompanied by Mary as far as Nazareth, where she awaited his return. She was always so solicitous about him. There came also to comfort the Holy Family on the death of Saint Joseph, and to see Jesus again, Joseph Barsabas, the son of Mary Cleobas by her second marriage with Sabbas, and the 3 sons of her first marriage with Alphaeus, Simon, James the Less, and Thaddeus, all 3 of whom already carried on business away from home. They had no close communication with Jesus since his childhood. They knew in general of Simeon's and Anne's prophecies on the occasion of his presentation in the temple, but they attached no importance to them. They preferred to follow John the Baptist, who soon after passed through these parts. Jesus begins his public ministry. Jesus on his way to Hebron. Jesus went through Nazareth going to Capernaum to Hebron, passing through the indescribably beautiful country of Gennesareth, and by the hot baths of Emmaus. These baths were on the declivity of a mountain about an hour's distance further from Magdalene in the direction of Tiberias. The meadows were covered with very high, thick grass, and on the declivity stood the houses and tents between rows of fig trees, date palms, and orange trees. The road was crowded, for a kind of national feast was going on. Men and women in separate groups were playing for wagers, the prize consisting of fruit. There, Jesus saw Nathanael. Nathanael was struggling against a sexual temptation that had seized him and was glancing over at the women's table. Jesus passed and cast upon him a warning look. That man has a sharp eye. Wait, without knowing, he cast on a warning look. Without knowing Jesus, Nathanael was deeply moved by his glance and thought, that man has a sharp eye. He felt that Jesus was more than an ordinary man. He became conscious of his guilt, entered into himself, overcame the temptation, and from that time kept a stricter guard over his senses. I think I saw there also Nephtali, known as Bartholomew, and that a glance from Jesus touched him also. Jesus journeyed with two of his young friends to Hebron in Judea. They did not remain faithful to him. They separated from him. But after his resurrection, converted by his apparition on Mount Thebes in Galilee, they once again joined his followers. In Bethania, Jesus visited Lazarus, who looked much older than Jesus. He appeared to me to be fully 8 years his senior. Lazarus had large possessions, landed property, gardens, and many servants. Martha had her own house and another sister named Mary, who lived entirely alone, had also her separate dwelling. Magdalene lived in her castle in Magdalum. Lazarus was already long acquainted with the Holy Family. He had an early period aided Joseph and Mary with large alms, and from first to last did much for the community. The purse that Judas carried and all the early expenses he supplied out of his own wealth. From Bethania, Jesus went to the temple in Jerusalem. So it's really sad that St. Joseph died, Jeanette, our guy. Aw. At the time, he drew near for Jesus to begin his mission of teaching. And so he's just about, so I guess he's, what, 30, Jeanette?
It said he's a little older. He said between.
Oh,
It's
okay, yeah.
somewhere. Yeah,
I
we'll
saw
read
him
it.
ever more solitary and toward the same time the 30th year. Oh yeah, it does say here. Sorry. I was thinking about having to turn the page. Joseph began to decline toward the same time the 30th year. So yeah, he was 30. I saw Jesus and Mary often with him. Mary sat on the ground by his couch or on a little stool. I don't know about you, but as an older person, I happen to be very flexible, but and my mom was too. She could get down like that, but I know a lot of old people that can't. So he must have been a very flexible person. You see how each thing teaches us? Because some people can't do that are older. Now, I happen to be able to because we happen to be extremely flexible. That's why Elizabeth could do that circus arts, because she had that same flexibility, which her father was extremely stiff. So I was wondering what the heck our kid was going to be like because he was so stiff. But anyway, the three-legged stool served also for a table. So, she didn't see them eating much, but brought some refreshment. But when they did, they brought some refreshment to Joseph's bedside. So he was in bed at that point, or on that stool. And it consisted of white four-cornered pieces about 2 fingers in breadth, and they lay side by side. I wonder what it was.
It kind
It
of sounds
sounds
like little pieces
bread.
of French toast or bread or something.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I was gonna say, I was I was curious. It's amazing God's plans in his mind and what he's already planned for us, because Saint Joseph, being his father, so holy, and he didn't cure him. He didn't make him better.
Wow, yeah, I didn't
He
think of
just
that.
he just accepted the death, and Saint Joseph accepted it, full of love still, and faith. His faith never went away. His faith was very constant through his death, because
Yeah,
he had days of not eating well, of feeling like he's gonna die, and he accepted it, and Jesus allowed it,
yeah.
holding him, but allowed it. So
Well, when my mom was dying, it was right before, and it was 8 months before that she was falling and she was in the hospital. And I was like, you know what? She's ready. Like, I somehow know when someone is about to get ready to go. And I said to my sons, hurry up and finish this apartment, because they were building an apartment in my son's house for me. And I said, hurry up and do this because Granny needs this apartment. So there was a second part of the apartment, like a back room. And so I stayed in there, and then we gave my mom the apartment. They hurried up and got it done. We moved her in there, and I knew it wasn't gonna be long. I thought it was gonna be about 6 months. Well, it turned out to be 8 months. And she was very scared of death. And she said the nurses in there were trying, when she was in the hospitalization at the 8 months, they were trying to force her to accept she was going to die. And she was like, I am not dying. No, I'm not dying like this. And I was like, that's fine. I said, you'll just move up here. Like, we literally can choose. My mom chose not to die there alone, because it was like a 3-hour drive for everyone in our family except my niece, who was not a good support. She was a recovering addict, and she was not really always good like that. So she would fall off the wagon often, and we never knew when. But nevertheless, she came up, and she lived about 8 months, and she still wasn't accepting that she was dying. And she was mad because my son was rehabbing his house, and the insulation and all that. She was collecting it so that she could send it for testing. She's like, my lungs. I'm like, and then he had to have termite. We had to go and stay in a hotel for a few nights because he was having the whole place tented, because it was an older place. So anyway, she was so afraid. I'm like, Mom, you're on your last legs. Your lungs are damaged beyond damaged. You did how many years of this, and you're worried about that. You need to stop. So we knew she was going. Well, when she finally did die a few months later, um when she was about to, she said, what do you think? And I knew not to say, I think you're on your last leg and you're dying. And I said, well, Mom, we never know when. It's only God who knows. She goes, I want to know what you really think. I said, I think your lungs are done. She had COPD. She had been on oxygen for 15 years. Like,
yeah,
she went
yeah.
way beyond. So anyway, she finally was accepting when we were in when she died on the way to the hospital. And this is how I know that when God says you won't die without the sacraments, if you do wear the brown scapula, and you say the rosary and all that. They brought her back. I never knew this was happening because I was meeting her there with my car because I knew I was going to have to come home, and it was only around the corner. So I let her get in the ambulance alone, and I followed with my car, and they told me she died on the way, and they had her she was intubated. And I said, that needs to come out of her as soon as possible. So within a few days, my niece came up, and they wouldn't let me be there. So I said, well, at least let my niece to comfort her. My niece, the one that had been addicted. So she went in and held her hand while they took her breathing tube out, because I said she's scared, because I could tell when my mom was looking at me, her eyes are darting around, and she was scared to death. I knew that she needed that out of her, and she would be fine. I think they overreacted. They said putting that in her. I think they could have just brought her back. But anyway, so she came back, and finally they're like, well, what do you want to do? She couldn't breathe those so many days. I said, I think we need to go to hospice. So I talked to her doctor, and I said, Mom, you're going to have to go to hospice. Are you ready for that? And she was finally accepted. So I think, and she was like you, scared to death of death, scared to death. I wasn't, because of my near death. She was scared. She finally accepted. I think there comes a time when people know it's their time. I think you are like that. I think when your time comes, I think you are going to accept it. Like, you're just not ready for that yet.
Well, they're letting me wear my scapular tomorrow for my surgery.
Oh, you have
I
to.
asked her.
Yes, I did for my lung surgery. When they took my upper lobe out of my lung, I did too. So they know that that's important, and it doesn't have any metal in it. So anyway, so here we are. They gave him something to drink out of a mug. When Joseph was dying, Mary sat at the head of his bed and holding him in her arms. Oh, I could just see this, Jeanette. Can you
That's
see
why he's the
this?
patron of a happy death. Because how
Oh,
could you not be happy to
that's
have
right.
Mary and Jesus both
Right.
holding you when you're dying?
But I never thought about that. Jesus didn't heal him, like you said. Like, that never even crossed my mind. I'm glad you brought that up, because it
And
didn't even.
in the litany of Saint Joseph, there's many things, and one of them is patron of happy death.
Yes, you're right.
So,
Now I remember. Because I remember thinking, why? Well, that's why he had Jesus and Mary. You're right, Jeanette. So, the whole room, again, brilliant with light and full of angels, reminds me of when Jesus was being born. Remember, it was full of light and all
yeah.
that. And you know what? They say that happens at all of our deaths. And my mom, I told you, said that there was a guy in the corner with a body that she was real impressed with. And I believe he was in the corner because he was a little too big. These angels are about, they say, 7 or 8 foot. They're much bigger than humans. So further away, she wouldn't realize how big he was, and it wouldn't startle her as much. That's why I think the angel was over in the corner of the room. He had to get the furthest from her. And he was sitting there waiting for her to die, like angels are with us. And he was sitting there waiting. This angel, I believe it was my mom's guardian angel. Jeanette, I hope you're doing those 3 prayers that we're supposed to do this month, each day, for your guardian angel. Jeanette?
You're gonna have to call me and do it with me, I think.
Okay, but
I've been too stressed this
I've
last
been
week.
doing it on holy ground in church.
That's
and now,
awesome.
yeah,
That's awesome.
I really want you to. I'm going to text you each day to do it.
Okay.
It's not even a minute.
I know.
I don't want to hear it. It's not even a minute.
Okay.
Please. Okay, so anyway, me always helping Jeanette. She helps me too, though. God knows. Anyway, so here's Jesus near Joseph's breast, like Mary's behind her, and he's right up at the top beside him, which I can see it. And then after his death, his hands were crossed like this on his breast, I think, or maybe like that. So, he was light and wait, he was wrapped from head to foot in the white winding sheet. Well, we know that, I think, from Lazarus, when we find out about him curing Lazarus. We've heard about that. So it's in the Bible. and laid in a narrow casket. We know that they're small. So the beautiful tomb, a gift of a good man. I mean, some man once again gave up a tomb, another good man, these are the good people of our society that give when they are wealthy. That's what God wants of them, and that's a good man. So maybe he was wealthy. He was at least wealthy enough to give his tomb up. So only a few men followed. It's accompanied with angels, environed with light, Jeanette. Oh my gosh. With Mary and Joseph, she saw it accompanied and environed with light, and Joseph's remains were removed afterward by Christians to Bethlehem and interred. Now, a lot of things, if you don't know, were found because of St. Catherine's visions. Literal things have been found that she visioned. If you don't know, she has a website, and it's posted below, whether you're on Facebook or in YouTube. Look in the details, because this, in the description rather, this is a fact that, and you can look it up on her website, things that were actually discovered because of her. I don't know if they've ever found Joseph's remains. I don't think so, because we would have known that. But supposedly here they are in Bethlehem and interred. So
I don't know why I feel that he's been assumed like Mary to heaven. I don't.
You think?
I don't quite believe that he was left.
Really?
I do.
Interred means placed in a grave or tomb, typically with funeral rites. So they put him in there and gave him funeral rites. So I don't know. But Joseph had to die because he would have been the protective father and not allowed them to do that to Jesus. See, God knows in his wisdom what is necessary. Even though he was quiet, he also was extraordinarily protective. So Jesus had support from the malice from his 20th to his 30th year. Let's see, what does this say? Joseph he could not be endured his crucifixion. He was too gentle. He had already suffered much from the persecution. Jesus had to support him from the malice of the Jews from his 20th to his 30th year. See, then how could he be old? Oh, Jesus was 20. For 10 years, Jesus had to support him because they couldn't bear the sight of Joseph. Wow. Wow. Their jealousy often made them exclaim that the carpenter's son thought he knew better. Wait a minute. This doesn't make sense.
So if Jesus would have healed him, he would have still been persecuted because he was a man and he was his father. And so Jesus would have had to live taking care of his father instead of doing his ministry, which is what he did. And Mary stayed with the women most of the time. So that was the reason that God also took him, because Jesus had 3 years to do his ministry, what he was sent here on earth to do, and the father of his foster father or whatever, his earthly father, did his duty and needed to be taken home. So that kind of makes me feel a little better.
Yeah. But also I like when you call him foster father, because there are many really loving foster parents out there, and I love that they can say Jesus had a foster father too. So, and the good ones, I mean, there's some bad ones, but there are some good, really good foster families. So anyway, their jealousy made them exclaim the carpenter's son. He thought he knew better than others, because he did. And he frequently was at variance with the teachings of the Pharisees, and they always had around him a crowd of young followers. But Mary never ceased to suffer from these persecutions. That woman endured that's why we honor her so much. She stayed true to God despite the hell she had to live. A dog ripped up my skin yesterday. I always go up to these dogs. He's just a puppy, and he ripped all my skin. I have really thin skin.
no.
I know. I have really thin skin, and he literally, I can't take this off.
Your son's dog?
No, actually, my neighbor. I haven't gone to my son since
Oh
4th of July.
no.
But yeah, my neighbor, because it's just a puppy though. I'm the one that went up to him. It's not their fault. I'm the one that went up to him, and he, of course, you know how puppies bite at you. He was just biting, and he bit at me, and but anyway, it's just a baby though. But anyway, I know. But so that's why I'm like, in case you wonder why I have this big bandage. Anyway, so Mary was honored because she suffered so much, and and Anne thought they were much worse than martyrdom. So she experienced much worse than martyrdom, according to Anne Catherine. So unspeakable was the love with which Jesus in his youth bore that the jealous persecution of the Jews. You could become to resent someone who is persecuting you, which most humans do. We come to hate someone who is persecuting us as humans. He was human, but yet he had enough love for the people because they were his people, and he didn't have a bit of hate in him. So I find that so fascinating, you know? So after Joseph's death, they went to a little village, and with few houses. I wonder why they had to leave their house. I was wondering here. So this Levi, gave, and to such a little place, and this Levi gave them a house, surrounded by a ditch of standing.
Well, maybe because
like a moat.
Joseph wasn't there anymore to pay it with his work as a carpenter, and they had to move somewhere else. They didn't have that income coming from Joseph, because Joseph was always doing stuff, right? Didn't he say he would move to find jobs when there
Well,
weren't
he did
any?
say he had to take care of him for the last 10 years, so I don't know.
Well, I think he probably did little things here and there, like
Maybe.
a handyman or something.
Maybe, yeah.
I don't know.
Maybe. A couple of Levi's people were also, so here he leaves in all the servants, like how beautiful and generous. And then I found it fascinating. We said that he didn't know Peter, but Peter's father retired when he gave over the fishery. I guess that's when he did know him then. Okay, right. He knew him by then. So Peter's father retired there when he gave over the fishery at Bethsaida. So, and then by then Jesus had many followers, but they weren't faithful. Like, they were young people. Young people aren't that faithful. So I thought it was interesting. He was young, so he had all these young people following him. You notice that young people follow people easily. So they were the easiest, like the Democrats use the young people to confuse them because they're just not as, so I think it's interesting that he was with the young people. They saw the truth sooner, which I find interesting. The Lazarus family in Bethania were already acquainted, so these people knew him. But the Pharisees of Nazareth were against Jesus, and they called him a vagrant. These are the Pharisees, Jeanette, not the Sadducees, the Pharisees.
Yeah, I think the Sadducees were more into politics. So the Pharisees are the ones that were always at the church and that were more
okay.
the people that were preaching. They were the preachers. Okay. And the Sadducees, I believe, were more in the, like, they were in there in the church, but they weren't like right there on your face.
Yeah, just to have the political control. Gotcha. That makes sense. Levi gave him that house that he might not fear disturbance and have his father, which I thought was so beautiful. So, and Levites become the priests. So they give up even their homes,
I love the name Levi. I like that name.
Do you?
Yeah.
Yeah. There was on the lake around Capharnum. See, I don't know the maps. I would love to know these. Like when these came up, I wish we could have maps pop up and so we could
They
see
are
it.
actually in the Bibles. A lot of the study Bibles.
They're in
Um,
the Great
and
Adventure.
yes, and the Great Adventure Bibles are beautiful because they have like a section just to let you know the maps and where in the Bible these things
But
were.
I heard a review about the maps about the Great Adventure Bible, and they had a criticism about it, and I don't remember what it was. But it was something about the maps, so I don't know. Someone said this is a Protestant Bible because blah 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 blah. Something negative. I don't know. It was one of those like those they get too the traditionalists. I love the traditionalists, but they get a little too like correct. But anyway, so here they are. There were many distinguished Jews that had gardens and castles there. So it seems like a more affluent area, and there were several harvests during the year, uncommonly beautiful leaves and blossoms. So it was a really blessed place because it was all at the same time, it says. So Herod was among the distinguished Jews that owned homes. So this sounds like an extremely elite place that Levi gave him. So he didn't give him just this old shack. He gave him a very valuable place. So let's see. And never once saw the women in public or at work in the fields, except the poorest gleaning some ears of corn. So they were all basically rich, is what this is saying to me. They were amongst rich people. And then even here it says about the slaves. They were mostly the slaves that were running around. And then Mary Cleopas, who was her third husband, the father of Simeon. Did you know that Mary Cleopas was the father of Simeon? I didn't know that.
Mary Cleopas was a father?
I mean, was her husband, her third husband, was the father of Simeon? I didn't know that.
I know that Mary Cleopas was the one that was at Jesus's crucifixion. That was one of the Marys that was there because she was Cleopas's wife at that time.
So,
and I know that one of those
Cleopas, is that Clopas? You're saying Clopas, but does that mean this, Mary?
I think so. I think it's I just don't pronounce it.
Okay, but
I don't know. I gotta look it up. I'll look it up.
But let me ask you a question. Here it says Mary Cleopas, who was her third husband,
her last,
the father of Simeon. So that means that she was not the mother of Simeon, but he was the father of Simeon.
So maybe it was a stepson.
So I'm wondering.
I don't know.
Maybe his wife died.
She's the one that had all the sons that people think were Jesus's brothers, but they're not. They were his cousins. That's why they were so close, and the same name Mary. So they were confused, saying, "Oh, all these other family, all these brothers. The brothers were really Mary, Cleopas's sons, not."
And you know what makes sense about Simeon here? If Simeon's mother died when he was young, often children whose parents die young, especially mothers, they become very intuitive and prophetic. Not always prophetic, but very intuitive. Yeah. And so Simeon is the one that told Mary that she would be pierced with the sword. Her heart will be
Yes.
pierced. So I think that's interesting that we see that here. So the rest of her family and the servants remain at Anne's. Look at that. They remain at Anne's, and
Yes.
Jesus goes and lives in someone else's house. It's like, it's weird that Anne takes in this family. She doesn't take in Mary and Jesus, but yet she takes, so that's like a little confusing to me. Why?
Maybe the angels helped them see where they need to be, because Mary in 3 years was going to be left with John and the ministry and everything. So I think
Well,
that
she
was all
had to
very,
die. She had to have died by the time
yeah.
Joseph
I
died.
don't know. I don't
I
know.
no, because this is saying she's still alive. I don't know. So, but this is a little confusing. But yeah. Anyway, so a short time after, Jesus goes to Capernaum on the way to Nazareth to the region Hebron, and he's accompanied by Mary as far as Nazareth. So Mary wants to go. Now Nazareth, they've been to before. That they call him Jesus of Nazareth.
Yeah.
When she awaited the Holy Family on the death of Saint Joseph, and or rather, wait, she awaited his return. She was always solicitous. Yeah.
Could you pause it for just a minute?
Okay. Sorry, guys. Jeanette had to go. Her mom is up, so she had to do that. But anyway, so here we are. And uh, let's see. So where were we? So there also came a time to comfort the Holy Family on the death of Saint Joseph, and to see Jesus again. So Jonas Barsabas, the son, see, this is why I like Jeanette here, because she knows a lot of these details. Mary Cleopas by her second marriage with Sabas. So this is just explaining these people. But Mary Cleopas' children, like Jeanette was just telling me, telling us, Simon, James the Less, and Thaddeus, they were all we know around Jesus. And but they had no communication with Jesus. So I find that interesting. They knew in general of Simeon and Anne's prophecies, but it's just weird that they thought no importance to them. What are they doing? They're following John the Baptist, who soon passed through these parts. So I just find that so interesting. So then here's Jesus on his way to Hebron. And he went through Nazareth in going to Capernaum, passing through, and I wish we had this to see. And the hot baths of Emmaus. Remember when they were on the road to Emmaus? That just brings up to me. So these baths were on the declivity of a mountain, about an hour's distance, and near the direction of Tiberias, which makes me think of the Tiberias River, and then also makes me think of them throwing the Pachamama in the Tiberias. The meadows were covered with high, thick grass, and on the declivity stood the houses and tents. So I'm just seeing all this. The men and women are in separate groups, and and they're getting fruit for prizes. So that's interesting. And there Jesus sees Nathanael, and remember, he's going to be at the wedding at Cana. It's Nathanael's wedding. And he's struggling against sexual temptation. And I think this is so interesting. And all of a sudden, these glances and Jesus letting him know. Now we kind of know why. He ran across a lot of people, including that thief who he saved, but they didn't have their conscience illuminated. This was an illumination of conscience, because he noticed that Jesus' sharp eye, and he knew that Jesus was more, well, they all did, but yet it didn't illuminate. But Nathanael had a special purpose. So Jesus didn't like really say, hey. Just like a parent, when you really care about someone, you say, hey. Jesus was saying, hey. And then also, if you notice, so from that point on, he kept a stricter guard over his senses. So, maybe those people had the opportunity and they chose not to. I don't know, but it seems that way to me, that his hey, hey, hey really was for a good reason. He was going to be going to his wedding, and that was going to be the first miracle. And he also brought the marriage, the sacrament of marriage because of that. So I think it was very important that he went there. And so I think that was the hey, hey, hey for that reason. But I could be wrong. Maybe those other people chose not to use their illumination of conscience, properly. But the thief did get into heaven. So I don't know. I think I saw there, maybe he was meant to be there next to him, and Jesus was letting sinners know at the end. So maybe he had his purpose and he was to go on and be a sinner and a thief. Because remember, he did go back to his, he was kept by his father while his mother was let out, the thief, when he was a little child. And he got, you learn from your father, and he learned to be a thief from his father, and we live what we know. And so Jesus forgave him for that. So I just think that's so fascinating. So here, Nathalie, known as Bartholomew of Jesus, and that glance from Jesus touched him because he was going to be a follower. So see his illumination of conscience. Maybe that's why they were to be, so I just find that fascinating. So he journeyed with his two young friends to Hebron in Judea. They did not remain faithful to him. They separated from him, but after his resurrection, converted by his apparition on Mount Theobus. So these young friends, I don't think they're not Bartholomew and that one. Apparently they're two different young friends. They don't name them. She doesn't name them. But after the resurrection, converted. So unless she's, I don't know, but I don't think she's talking about them. I could be wrong. In Bethania, Jesus visited Lazarus, who looked much older than Jesus. He appeared to be about 8 years his senior. He had large possessions, landed property, and many servants. Martha had her own house, and another sister named Mary, who lived entirely alone. And you guys know the story of Mary and Martha. Martha complains to Jesus that Mary is just sitting at his feet praying, and she's having to do all the work. And he said, Mary's doing the right thing. And so the whole Mary Martha argument gets in there. If you guys haven't heard of the Mary Martha, I'll put a little link below. And so Magdalene lived there in her castle in Magdalum. I don't remember who this Magdalene is, but apparently she's someone to be mentioned. So I'll have to look that up. Lazarus was already long acquainted with the Holy Family. He's the one that Jesus raises within these 3 years. After this, he raises him. He had at an earlier period aided Joseph and Mary with large alms from first to last. So he gave money, like Levi gave a house, did much for the community. So he's rich, as it said earlier in this reading. The purse that Judas carried and all the early expenses supplied out of his own wealth. So apparently Lazarus gave the money that Judas Iscariot carried. Remember, he was the money person in the group before he turned on Jesus. So from Bethania, Jesus went to the temple in Jerusalem, and that's where we leave it. So I think that's interesting. The next is the family of Lazarus, which we will read. I don't think it's going to be tomorrow because Jeanette is getting ready for her surgery. So we probably I'm probably not going to post this until tomorrow, which is Wednesday. That'll be the day before that'll be the day of Jeanette's surgery. So the next time you see Jeanette, it'll be after, and I don't know how good she's going to feel. So I don't know exactly when we're going to be back. It could possibly be Thursday or Friday, she says. If not, we'll definitely be back the following Monday. So possibly one more reading today. She said she's not up to tomorrow because it'll be the day before and her nerves are kind of shot. She's very worried. So please pray for her. And we will see you guys the next time. Don't forget to come back. The family of Lazarus is going to be a very important reading.